Welcome to Prism Planning and Solutions Group's video library. Prism Planning and Solutions Group is a DBA of Insight Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where Insight Advisors and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. This material is solely for informational purposes. Past performance is no guarantee of future returns. Investing involves risk and possible loss of principal capital. No advice may be rendered by Insight Advisors unless a client service agreement is in place. Please go to www.ppsgrp.com to learn more about working with Prism.
Good evening, and welcome to tonight's live web presentation, Financial Exploitation, Protecting Yourself and Loved Ones. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Julia Peloso Barnes, owner and founder of Prism Planning and Solutions Group. Prism's mission is to empower you to pursue your dreams and passions while ensuring that you feel well cared for, informed, and secure. One way that we seek to help simplify the financial intricacies of your life is to bring you professionals from different areas who can share useful and important information. We do have some housekeeping items. We may discuss different ideas and strategies in tonight's presentation, but none of the ideas that we share should be interpreted as specific recommendations for anyone. At Prism, we only provide advice to clients with whom we are engaged and for whom we've done a financial plan. If you'd like to learn more about working with us, please feel free to visit our website at www.ppsgrp.com. As we go through tonight's presentation, if you have questions, please use the Q&A feature on your Zoom control bar. We'll do our best to answer questions as we go along, and we'll make sure that we address any unanswered questions at the end. So let's begin. Prism Planning and Solutions Group is pleased to host Ben Rizzuto of Janus Henderson to talk about the latest trends in fraud and financial exploitation. Ben, who's also a certified financial planner and chartered retirement planning specialist, is a wealth strategist with the specialist consulting group at Janus Henderson Investors. In this role, he works with financial advisors and their high net worth clients to find solutions to today's increasingly difficult retirement, wealth transfer, and financial planning issues. Ben is a regular contributor to Janus Henderson Insights and is periodically cited in industry publications. Prior to joining Janus in 2014, he worked as a business development consultant for Jackson National Life, where he helped financial advisors grow their fee-based practices. Ben received his bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Colorado Boulder and his international MBA with concentrations in finance and Italian from the University of South Carolina Darla Moore School of Business. He holds FINRA Series 7 and 66 securities licenses, and as I mentioned before, this certified financial planner and chartered retirement plan specialist designations. He has 19 years of financial industry experience. Now, tonight, we're going to talk about financial exploitation. We see this in the news every day, and many of my clients have expressed concerns to me that how best to protect themselves and their families. Ben, can you walk us through things to look for in order to protect ourselves and our assets?
Sure, Julia, I'd be happy to, and it's great to be with you tonight to go over, as you mentioned, an issue that is becoming more and more prevalent, and something that, as you'll see, many of us need to be aware of. Because, as you mentioned in the beginning, clients who work with you, you really try to think about their financial plans, their financial dreams, and their financial security. And this idea of financial exploitation is one that can certainly throw a wrench into those things. So my hope for tonight is to help people be a little bit more aware of what to look out for, both from a personal standpoint, but then also from a fraud and scam standpoint. Now, to do that, we're going to cover a number of different areas today, and we're going to start with a couple case studies. And I really like to start with these case studies because they highlight who among us should be aware of and be thinking about this idea of financial exploitation. So to start with, we're going to start with someone by the name of Brooke Astor, who many of you may be aware of. She was a New York philanthropist, socialite. She married into the Astor family fortune. If you're aware of the Astor family, you may know that they built their fortune through real estate, and going back a little bit further, actually the fur trade in Europe back in the, I believe, 1700s. But here you can see what I think is many times the prototypical idea that many people think about when they think about financial exploitation. a person like Brooke who, as she got older, developed Alzheimer's disease. And unfortunately, her son took advantage of that. He stole millions of dollars from her by convincing her to sign checks in his name or just taking withdrawal slips. Now, what's interesting about this story is that it was actually her son's son, Brooke Astor's grandson, who came forward with information that led to his father's prosecution and conviction. But again, we look at this on a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum, we have this sort of case where we have an older adult who has developed cognitive issues or experienced cognitive decline who is taken advantage of. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we see this case, Cindy Crawford and her husband, Randy Gerber. As you can see in this case, there was an extortion attempt made on them by a model that was familiar with or had worked with Cindy in the past. He was able to gain access to their home through their daughter's nanny, had some pictures, and he held those pictures for ransom for $100,000. Luckily, he was extradited, he was found out, this never took place. But what's most important about this is that this case occurred in 2009. At that point, Cindy Crawford was 43, her husband Randy was 47. They were both in fine physical and mental shape. So you can see that based on these two case studies, it really may be all of us, or it is all of us, who need to be aware of what financial exploitation is and what scammers are doing these days. So with all that said, let's take a step back and define what financial exploitation is and what we should really be looking for. Now, there are three definitions on this page, and I start with the one on the left under the gray circle. Financial exploitation is defined as the misappropriation or misuse of an older and or vulnerable adult's assets or funds. And for me, the most important part of that sentence is the and or, because it really highlights who needs to be worried about financial exploitation. It is not just older adults, it is those who are vulnerable. And we just saw from our two case studies that many, if not all of us, may be vulnerable to financial exploitation. Along with that, if we look at the other two definitions on the screen, deceiving someone with the promise of goods and services, financial benefits that may not exist, or cashing someone else's checks without their permission. If we think about those two definitions, there's really no age requirement that goes into either of them. These are sorts of things that can happen to any and all of us. So I think all three of these definitions really highlight how important it is for all of us to be aware of financial exploitation and be able to protect ourselves and, more importantly, our assets when it comes to this sort of idea. So that's what financial exploitation is. Let's next talk about who are the common perpetrators. And as you can see, unfortunately, in 62% of cases, financial exploitation happens with people an older person already knows and or trusts. I'd probably even take out the older there. Happens with people that we know or already trust. So this can be family, it can be friends, it can be caretakers, service providers, or strangers. What's important to note here is that it can be someone that we know. And I think this really highlights how important it is to create a plan or think about how you want things to go as you age. How do you want to be cared for as you age? Who are going to be your caretakers when you get older? It's really important to sit down, think about this, put this as part of your financial plan, right? So that everybody knows what is supposed to happen. So when there may be a change in what happens or who is taking care of you, people are more aware of that and people can be alerted to that. Once you make that plan, of course, it's important to share it with your family members. So again, everyone is on the same page. So unfortunately, again, it is those who may be close to us or those that we already know that take advantage. But just by being aware of these scams, that can certainly help. One last thing that I want to touch on before moving on is the risk factors that can increase one's vulnerability to financial exploitation. And there are three of them: psychological vulnerability, physical decline or physical vulnerability, and cognitive impairment. All right. So what do I mean by those things? First off, psychological vulnerability. When we think about psychological vulnerability, I think it's important to think about decreased fulfillment in life that may lead to increased depression. All right, that's what we're thinking about when we say psychological vulnerability. And why this is important is because psychological vulnerability can increase the chances of fraud by 300%. So when might this occur? Well, as we get older, we might lose a loved one or a spouse. That can lead to increased depression. Before then, many times when people retire, they can be less fulfilled. And I know many times people look forward to retirement with a lot of excitement, but once that, what I might call sugar rush of excitement wears off, people many times aren't quite sure what to do with themselves. They aren't as active as they used to be, and they can be less fulfilled, which can lead to greater depression, greater loneliness, and can again increase that vulnerability. So think about those folks in your family or around you who may be going through these sorts of periods in their life. And if so, bring them in, make sure you're connecting with them. Second is physical decline or physical vulnerability. We all know as we get older, things don't work as well as they used to, and we may need more help. I believe at age 65, 35% of Americans have some issue with activities or daily living, right? So we're going to need more help. But with that increased need, with that increased dependency that we may have others for help, that can lead to increased vulnerability as well. So we need to think about who is dealing with these sorts of issues. See who is taking care of them and make sure that we are as connected as possible with them. The final one is cognitive decline or cognitive impairment. And this, I believe, is the most difficult of the three because cognitive functioning works on a spectrum. And when we think about that spectrum, there is really no marker or alert that we receive that tells us that someone has gone from cognitively sound to having mild dementia, right? So again, there can be a lot of gray area, but this is important to try to be in tune with because a 15% decrease in memory recall can lead to a 12% decrease in wealth. Now that could be just from writing checks, dual checks, right? Or forgetting where someone places money, or it could be full-blown financial exploitation. The other thing that's really important and difficult about cognitive impairment is even if you've done a lot of the planning that I talked about earlier, maybe you've put together a power of attorney for finance, power of attorney for healthcare, will or other sorts of documents. Even if you've done that good planning, if there's not a medical diagnosis that can be given, which may be difficult in some cases, those instruments can't come into play, right? So this doesn't mean that we shouldn't do planning, but it really just highlights how difficult that piece of the puzzle can be. So again, psychological decline, physical decline, cognitive decline. Those are the three things that we want to be aware of and we want to be thinking about when it comes to friends and family members. So that's what and who and what to look out for when it comes to financial exploitation. Let's talk about the trends. And I will tell you that financial exploitation has probably been the most popular, unfortunately popular topic that I've talked about this year with both advisors and their clients. And the trends will show us why that is the case. So as you can see here, the FBI puts out a report every year on financial exploitation or elder fraud, as they put it. And here you can see the numbers for 2022. In 2022, 88,000 victims over the age of 60 lost $3.1 billion through financial exploitation. The 2023 report just came out recently, and those numbers have increased to over 101,000 victims who lost $3.4 billion in assets. So the trends are not great. The other thing that I think is really important to think about when it comes to these numbers is the fact that the number of victims is probably lower, or the number of victims that we're seeing here is probably low. And the number of assets at risk is probably higher than what we're thinking. Because remember, that $3.1 billion that we're seeing on the screen are the assets that were lost. It's not taking into account all the assets that may be at risk on a day-to-day basis. And the AARP did some research, and they said that in their estimate, up to $20 billion per year may be at risk through these sorts of scams, frauds, and financial exploitation. So again, it really highlights how important this is to be aware of, because those are assets that make up your financial plan. And if those assets are stolen, then your financial plan takes a different turn or is on a different trajectory. Now, like I said earlier, this is something we all need to be aware of, and this is just for those over 60. So let's talk about how this affects those who may be younger. And here you can see it doesn't matter the age range. Those who are physically fit, mentally fit, technologically savvy, it does not matter. People that are much younger than age 60 are losing millions of dollars through financial exploitation. But one thing that's important, and I want to dig into these numbers a little bit, is a couple things that I've noted on these trends. And first off, on the right-hand side of the page in the bar chart, you can see the dollar amounts as far as losses are concerned. And that's a pretty clear trend that we're seeing in that chart, in that the numbers continue to go upwards. But on the left-hand side of the page, we see the number of victims. And again, this is just over 60. But what we see is that while the overall trend is upward, there is some deviation, and there was actually a decrease in the number of victims in 2020 going into 2021. So that's led me to ask the question of, well, why? Why have we seen the number of victims decrease during that period? And I've got a couple ideas as to why. First off, what happened in 2020? Well, we know what happened in 2020. We had the pandemic. And whether we like it or not, I think all of us during that period of time felt at least a little, if not quite a bit, more isolated than we did in 2019 or we do currently today. And I think what occurred is that people may have been getting scammed out of money, but they felt isolated. They felt alone. They didn't know who to turn to. So they didn't report their cases. And that's one of the reasons Julia and I wanted to do this tonight, is to ensure that all of you know that there are resources and there are people out there to help, whether it be her, whether it be me at Janice Henderson, or whether it be some of the other resources that I'm going to talk about later on this evening. So that's one reason why I think we see that decline. The other reason why I think there's this decline, and why I think the number of victims is probably low, is one of the more important things to realize. The fact that when it comes to this issue of financial exploitation, there is a tremendous amount of embarrassment and shame that victims feel. And because of that embarrassment and shame, they don't come forward. And I've seen cases, I've heard stories, and you may have heard stories as well, where a family will be on the news or in the newspaper talking about what happened to their loved one. Their loved one felt embarrassed. They didn't know what to do. They felt ashamed. They didn't feel that they could come forward. And I've seen in many cases, people will commit suicide because of this. So I think that's another reason we wanted to do this, is to open up this topic and make sure that you feel more open and open to talk about this, because the more we can have open conversations about this, the more we can destigmatize the issue. And if it's less stigmatized, then we're more open, we're more cognizant of the issue, and we can take care of each other a bit more. Okay, so that's the trends that we're seeing. Let's now move on to what I think is probably the most important portion of the presentation, the common types of fraud that we're seeing. And this is really important because a stat that I recently heard from FINRA noted that if people have heard about certain types of fraud, and we're going to talk about 7 different types of fraud over this section. If people have heard about those types of fraud, they are 80% less likely to lose money to one of these opportunity-based scams. So just knowing about these types of fraud helps us be a little bit more aware. And I'd encourage you all to share these stories and share these ideas with your friends, because that, again, helps to educate them and helps to make them a little bit more aware as well. So let's start with tech and customer support fraud. Here you can see that folks lost over $700 million through this type of fraud in 2022. So how does this occur? Well, this occurs when we receive a text message or an email or a phone call or a pop-up message on our computer telling us that our device is corrupted or our software may need to be updated or something like that. And of course, within those messages, there's a link that we can click on or a number that we can call. And if we do one of those two things, then someone at the other end of that link or that telephone call would be happy to help us fix the issue. And this really leverages our unfamiliarity with technology. But in many cases, these can be fraudulent. So a couple things that I want to note for folks to help them steer clear of these frauds. First and foremost, when it comes to pop-up messages, I've been thinking about this recently. I don't know if I've ever received a pop-up message on a website or on my computer that I've really been excited to see. I mean, some of them will give us a 10% coupon off our next purchase, but overall pop-up messages are more of a nuisance than anything. So I think when it comes to pop-up messages, you can simply close them out and move on. But a couple other things to note when it comes to tech support. First and foremost, when it comes to companies like Apple or Microsoft or Dell or whatever it may be, remember that those companies are not going to reach out to you proactively via email when it comes to these sorts of issues, right? Now, if you reach out to them and you start a conversation regarding an issue that you're having with your computer or your device, then they may correspond via email, but they're not going to reach out proactively. So that's the first thing. The other thing that I would note when it comes to these sorts of things is if you receive a message, specifically via email, what I want you to do is look at that email, and in it, of course, you'll see the to and the from line. You'll see, for example, to Ben Rizzuto from, and it may say something like Apple support. That's just for example's sake. But remember that if you double click on that Apple support, who it's from, that will open that up and show you exactly what email address that message came from. And what you'll find in many cases with fraudulent emails is that there's a slight misspelling in the email. So instead of Apple A-P-P-L-E, it'll be A-P-L-E, for example. So there's a slight misspelling, or you'll find that the email comes from an email address that has nothing to do with Apple or Microsoft or Dell or whatever it may be. Simply by doing that, I think you can clear a lot of these messages out and decrease the risk of falling for those. Now, along that idea of email, let me give you a personal example. It's a little bit different than tech support fraud, but it really highlights this issue. I, like many of you, get emails from the Social Security Administration periodically. I just got my annual update for my benefits just the other day. But before then, I received another email from what looked to be the Social Security Administration. But in this one, it looked a bit different. It told me that my Social Security number had been suspended, which I didn't even know that was possible. But I read the email and it had a PDF that if I opened it up, there was a number I could call to get my Social Security number unsuspended. But what I did is I did exactly what I just told you all to do. I looked at who it was from and I double-clicked on Social Security Administration, and I found that email came from someone by the name of Alana Cohen141@gmail.com. Now, say what you will about the federal government or the Social Security Administration, I don't think that they run their email through a free Gmail account. So luckily, I was able to just simply delete that email, and instead of a scam, it turns into a great example for a presentation like this. So those are some things to think about when it comes to call center fraud. Investment scams. Now, if you're working with a financial advisor, if you're working with Julia, I would hope that any investment opportunities that come across your plate, you run by her first and foremost. But as you can see, many folks were not so lucky in 2022 as 4,500 people lost under $1 billion through investment scams. So what are some things that we need to be aware of when it comes to investment scams? There's a few main characteristics to be aware of. First off, this investment scam, or more likely investment opportunity, will come to you unsolicited, right? That's the first thing. The other thing that this investment opportunity will say it will provide you is high reward and little to no risk. So this is where we need to go back to that old adage of, does it sound too good to be true? And if it does, if something provides high reward with little to no risk, that's usually a bad combination. So that's something to think about. The last thing to be aware of is that there will be a sense of urgency or a time frame associated with this investment opportunity. Julia, we're reaching out to you with this great opportunity, but it's only available to you for a limited time. And that's one of those things that we need to be aware of, this urgency. Scammers are really trying to take advantage of urgency, whether it's an opportunity that is only going to be available for a short period of time, or an issue with our computer that we want to get fixed as soon as possible, or other things that we will talk about here shortly. That urgency pushes us as humans to want to fix problems. But in this case, it's important, and I will say this a couple more times probably this evening, it's important to stop, think, and take a pause to collect our thoughts and ask ourselves, does this really sound too good to be true in this case? Okay, so those are some things to think about when it comes to investments. One specific example that I will point out to you is one I read about recently from the past few months. It was actually in the New York Times, if you want to look it up. And this deals with timeshares. Now, I don't know if any of you have a timeshare, but when I've asked other people that I've done this presentation for, do you have a timeshare? Many will raise their hand, and then I'll follow that question up with, well, do you want to get rid of your timeshare? And many of those same hands will stay up. But here's what's happening. The Mexican cartel has actually gotten into this business. They've gotten lists of people who own timeshares. They are calling those people and they're saying exactly that. Would you like to get rid of your timeshare? Many people say yes. And they say, well, if you send us $50, $100, $200,000, we can start the process. Many people have done that and they've lost $50, $100, $200,000 just by that. Okay, so that's something to again think about. And again, that's one of those cases where this is a call that comes out of the blue, unsolicited, right? So those are some things to think about when it comes to investment schemes. Next, let's talk about lottery sweepstakes and inheritance scams. And this is one that many of us have probably dealt with in the past, because many of us received an email at some point in the past telling us that some way, somehow, we were part of a royal family or a royal lineage in Europe, or in many cases, Africa. And this happened so frequently in the past that this scam actually received a name. It was called the Nigerian Prince scam. And what these scams said was that, yes, you're part of this royal lineage or royal family. And if you help the person at the other end of the email do something, basically get this money out of a certain country, then you would be rewarded with a large sum. And in order to do that, there was a prepayment that needed to be made to unlock this prize, more or less. Now, the thing to remember when it comes to actual valid lotteries, valid sweepstakes, a valid inheritance, is that there's no prepayment that occurs in any one of those things, right? If you win the lottery, you're going to get your check. There's no prepayment, right? If you get an inheritance, you'll receive those assets. Of course, there could be tax ramifications after the fact, but that's for another day. So the thing to remember with these is that there's no prepayment that needs to be done in order to receive these sorts of prizes. But again, it's one of those things where scammers are really trying to take advantage of our inherent kindness that we have, our inherent sense of responsibility to help our fellow man, and in many cases, the sense of greed that many of us have to receive some huge prize. Next, I want to talk about what I think is the most difficult scam that we are dealing with these days, and that's this idea of confidence and romance scams. And before we get into this, let's take a step back and think about us as humans. Now, what is it that we as humans need? We, of course, need food and shelter, right? But once we get those sorts of things, we seek out companionship and intimacy and emotional connection with people. So it's really unfortunate that this is now a scam, because scammers are taking advantage of that inherent need that we all have to be close to someone and fall in love, right? And this is one that I think we're going to see more and more over the next several years, because as our population gets older, loved ones, spouses will die, widows will be around, they'll need to have companionship, they'll be dating online, they may be more lonely than they used to be. So I think this is something that we're going to see more and more. So let's talk about these sorts of things, because I know that you've probably heard about them, but what occurs is that someone goes on a website like Match.com or whatever it may be, and they are matching up with people, and scammers will develop a relationship. They will get a person to be in love with them in many cases, and then they will have some sort of financial issue where they will ask that person for help, right? And in many cases, what happens here is someone will meet this person, they will talk online, but they never meet in person, right? And that's one of the main things I think to think about and ask friends who may be doing this is, well, have you met this person in person? Are they real, right? But as you can see, this is a huge issue, $450 million lost in the past couple of years. One tip I would note for those who may be doing this these days is that, as you may know, if you meet someone on one of these websites, you can have a conversation with them on the platform. Many times scammers will try to take the conversation and move it off platform to something like WhatsApp. And if they do that, that can be a red flag. Now, one thing that I want to bring up here is how difficult this can be, because like I said, this is a very human thing that people are doing. Many of us, if not all of us, have fallen in love, right? So how do we help someone if we see this happening? And this can be difficult because none of us like to hear that we're doing something wrong. None of us like to hear that we have made a mistake. So we can't just go up to someone and say, how could you be so silly? This person is trying to steal your money, right? That may lead that person to completely shut down and close you out. So a framework that we like to talk about is a 3-step framework. Have you heard? Here are the facts, and here's what we can or should do. So for example, in this case, you might go to a friend and say, have you heard that more and more older adults are dating online and they're meeting people that turn out to be scammers? And I'm sure that your friend will say, oh yeah, I've heard about that on the news, or I know that my friend is doing some dating online. Yeah, I know all about that. Step one. Step two, well, did you know that people lost over $400 million in 2022 through these online scams? I didn't know that. Well, based on that, I think it's important that we really figure out who this guy or gal is. We make sure that you meet him in person, so we're sure that you don't fall victim to this, right? So by going at it in that direction, here we're telling someone about an issue that is occurring to others or has occurred to others. We are not directly saying that they are doing something wrong. So I think that's a better tact and a better way to do it in a much more helpful way. I'm here to do this to help you versus I'm here to tell you what you've done wrong. Next, let's move on to extortion. We saw extortion with Cindy Crawford, and this is one of those scams where I think technology is unfortunately going to make this easier for scammers in the future. But as you know, with extortion, someone reaches out to you saying that they have some sort of sensitive data, and if you don't do this or that, they are going to release this data. And as we talked about, we saw it with Cindy Crawford and the photos of her daughter. What we're seeing nowadays is with technology, scammers are able to kind of pump out these scams much more quickly via email. My wife has actually received one of these sorts of emails that basically told her that they had data on her about all the things that she was doing online. And what's interesting is once we receive one of those messages, even if we know it's not true, we think to ourselves, wait a second, did I do that? Do they have any information on me, right? And just that, just bringing up that idea makes us question ourselves. So again, it's really important to stop and think and step back and review what's actually going on. One other way that we've seen extortion cases pop up with technology is what some are calling the grandparents scam. So what scammers are doing to extort folks out of money is they're going on to websites like TikTok, and they are grabbing a snippet of a younger person's voice. And with artificial intelligence, you can recreate someone's voice with just 3 seconds of someone's audio. What happens is they recreate that voice, they call that young person's grandparent, and that grandparent gets a call that says, "Grandma, Grandpa, I'm in trouble. I've been in an accident. I need some money. Please don't tell mom and dad." Right? And think about that. All of us, if we're in that situation, what is our first inclination? We want to help, right? Whether we're a parent, a grandparent, a great-grandparent, we all want to help. So one way that families have kind of tried to alleviate this or protect themselves from this is having a safe word, right? My family, we've got a safe word. So if I were to get a call from my daughter talking about this, I'd ask her what the safe word is, and I could verify that it is truly her. Another thing I think is, if you get a message to this effect, is again to stop and think. Maybe try to contact the person via a different method, right? That can be one way that I've seen families protect themselves in these cases. But those are things to be aware of as well. Second to last idea that we'll talk about is non-payment, non-delivery. And of course, more and more of our transactions, more and more of our purchases are done online. And if you've spent any time on an app like Instagram or Facebook in the recent past, you know that you're going to see a number of different ads for a number of different products. But as you can see here, many folks lost over $50 million through things that they bought online that they never received. So a couple things to note. If you see a product online, I think it's always a good idea to try to search out the business via another method. So put them into a search engine and find their website that way. See what sort of reviews that business has on Google reviews or whatever it may be. That can help you get a sense of, is this really a business? If there are no reviews and the business just came into existence in the last month, that may be a red flag. A couple other things, think about Amazon or Walmart, those platforms. Many of us do much of our shopping there. And there are a number of third-party sellers on those websites. Same sort of thing. Take a look at who is the actual seller of a product. See how long they have been around. See what sort of reviews they have. Also, see what their return policy is. If it says they don't take returns, that may be a red flag. If there is just no return policy, that may be a red flag. One final thing is when it comes to recourse. If you make a purchase with a credit card, you're more likely to have some recourse to work with the credit card company to make sure to say that the purchase was fraudulent and get a refund. With a debit card, you're probably not going to be so lucky. So those are a few things to be thinking about there. The last one is cryptocurrency. And, we could talk about cryptocurrency as an investment opportunity separately, but I think within this conversation, cryptocurrency is a red flag. It is, if you hear cryptocurrency, if it's in the message, if it's in the text, if someone's talking about it, that is a reason to hang up, delete, whatever it may be, okay? And I've seen a number of cases when it comes to cryptocurrency where people will be offering, again, kind of investment opportunities when it comes to crypto, or as you can see here, that is the preferred payment method when it comes to most, if not all, types of scams. So if anytime that comes up, that's a red flag, and that's a reason to hang up, delete, whatever it may be. But as we finish up, the main thing that I want to remind folks of is scammers are trying to take advantage of the urgency that we have in these situations. The urgency we have to help, the urgency we have to fix a problem, the urgency we have to feel connection, right? But if we can stop, take a second, maybe get another perspective from Julia or a family member or whatever it may be, that may be the thing that helps to alleviate a lot of these issues. I want to finish up by offering up some ideas and some resources that are available to you through a partnership that we at Janus Henderson have with Wayne State University. Now, Wayne State University, as you may know, is up in Detroit, Michigan. They have some great researchers who have looked at the idea of gerontology and how people age. And one of the things that they've noted through this research is that financial exploitation can increase as people age, again, based on those three risk factors we talked about: psychological, physical, and cognitive. But along with that, they've created a number of great resources that are available to advisors, you all as clients, or your family members that really help to understand what financial exploitation is, understand what types of scams to be on the lookout for, and understand what are some things that we can do to help protect ourselves. So you could simply search for Wayne State University Institute of Gerontology and find those. The website that you could go to is a website called olderadultnestegg.com. So if you want to get that, reach out to Julia and she can provide that to you. So those are some great resources. One other resource that they offer that is really important is this SAFE program. Now, up until this point, we've been talking about ways to protect ourselves from financial exploitation. But based on the trends, we know that this is going to happen. My hope is that it doesn't happen to anyone on this call or anyone that's viewing this recording. But again, based on those trends, we know that it's going to happen. The question is, well, what do we do next? And I know Julia, through her firm, have a number of different processes that can help with this. But this SAFE program, Successful Aging Through Financial Empowerment, allows you to talk to coordinators and consultants and people who deal with or have dealt with dozens and dozens of these cases in the past. And they can take you through some of the procedural stuff that you need to be doing or thinking about, like filing a police report or a consumer report or freezing your credit, for example. But also, and maybe more importantly, they can help you work through the psychological and emotional issues that go along with this. Because like I said, these issues, the idea of financial exploitation is something that carries a lot of emotional weight. And if we can help figure out what we need to do both financially, but then also psychologically and emotionally, I think that helps us pick up the pieces and move forward in a good way. So as we finish up, I just want to remind folks that there are a number of resources that are available to you, whether it be first and foremost reaching out and talking to Julia about this, or using some of the resources and ideas that I talked about today. So I hope this helps to make everyone a little bit more educated, a little bit more aware of things to look out for. And again, I would note, take these lessons, take these ideas, share them with your family and friends, because the more that we can talk about them, I think the better protected we're all going to be, the more aware and vigilant we'll be. And the more aware and vigilant we are, the better protected our assets and our financial plans are going to be at the end of the day. So with that, Julia, I'll pass it back to you.
Great, Ben, thank you. And I want to thank you very much for walking us through some of these trends and some of the ideas and how we can protect ourselves and our loved ones. I just want to remind people that you can use the Q&A button on your control bar if you want to pose any questions. We don't have any yet. So I want to, again, thank Ben, thank David Butler, who was a colleague of Ben's. We've known each other for quite a while. Some of you know that Janice Henderson has been a very long-term investment partner for me. I often talk about having been in their office back in February of 2009. Which was a very interesting time in the investment world, following the 2008 housing crisis. And Janice goes back a long way. And again, they've been great partners. And just talking about tonight's presentation, I did see a couple of things that really struck me. And Ben, when you were talking about what people can do, one of the things that I either really hadn't heard before or hadn't registered was the idea of a safe word. And I think that that's something that's pretty easy for us all to implement with our close family and friends, right? So if we get one of those phone calls or one of those emails that says, hey, I'm in trouble, I need some money, so we can verify who's at the other end. Okay, I see we do have a comment here, and someone has actually just shared that one of these things actually happened to them. So one of our attendees says, I thought I knew all the tricks. Now I know the hard way about the tech support scams, and looking back, it was the speed and skill of the scammer that got me with a wire transfer scam. And this is what he's saying. I questioned every step of the way, but I never put it on pause, right? And I think that highlights how that urgency and the adrenaline rush kicks in. So thank you for sharing that. It's hard, right? And I think Ben talked about some of the stigma particularly if, we get caught in one of these things. But I really appreciate you sharing that this happened to you, because if we share with each other these different things that have happened, somebody else may take something away from it, right, and benefit from it. And remember, it's really just all about slowing down the process. There's very little in this world today that's going to be that urgent, all right, that you can't just take a minute, hit the pause button, whether it's literally or figuratively, take a step back, come down from that adrenaline rush. Because when someone tells us we're at risk, right, or we're vulnerable, we all get this big adrenaline rush. Our brain stops thinking, we go into reactive mode, right? So doing things that we can do to slow down the process is, I think, really, really helpful. So again, I want to thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Nothing in this life needs to happen right now, or very few things.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, somebody else has now shared something too. It's just really fascinating, Ben, when you go through these numbers, even amongst the people here this evening, we now have 2 people who've talked about getting caught up in one of these things. And so someone has shared that they were assisting a parent with one of these scams via email, right? So think about the Nigerian prince type scam, and had really, was helping the parent, had blocked these things, but one of them slipped through. We are bombarded with these things all day long. And I think what they rely on is that it's a numbers game, right? And so, this person is saying, unfortunately, they now know the difference between larceny and grand larceny. And that's a really, really hard lesson to learn. But again, we're all bombarded. It can be so easy if we're not giving something 100% of our attention. We're moving fast. We've got a lot of other things going on. We've all had those days where you click something and you're like, oh, did I really mean to do that? So it's a really, really a good point to take a minute. We get an email about doing something that's urgent. And that's why, by the way, I want to remind, our clients that sometimes you'll reach out to us about doing something with your account, and we always are going to take an extra step to contact you on a phone number that we already have. Now, we haven't talked about those things about, we'll get an email in our business that says, hey, I'm traveling. I need you to send money. I'm out of the country. My cell phone doesn't work here. Use this other number, right? And our rule is we need to talk to you verbally by being able to reach you on a phone number that we already have on file. And as much as it can be a pain in the neck, it's because we're trying to protect you, because we've got to try to stay 1 or 2 steps ahead of the bad guys. So,
Right.
So again, just to wrap up, Ben, I really want to thank you again. Thanks to David, thanks to all of you at Janus, and thanks to all of you who attended tonight's seminar, tonight's live web presentation. I appreciate it. If anybody has any other Q&A, this is the time to put them in there. So again, I will thank you. If anybody wants any information about working with Prism, you can find us at our website, which is ppsgrp.com. We'll get a recording up shortly on this on our YouTube channel. If anybody's interested in getting a copy of it, just let us know, or you can find it on the Prism Planning and Solutions Group YouTube channel. So with that, I wish everybody a good night. Thanks. Good night, everybody.
Take care, everybody.